Production versus consumption. That is typically the relationship with people when it comes to money. It enters into one's life and it leaves. Sometimes this is expressed by income and expenses. That's production versus consumption. Most people have an issue with consumption. And this is where budgeting comes into hand and is crucial. An emergency fund that holds a couple months in advance of expenses, let's say 4 months. If an emergency would happen, we would have no issue supporting ourselves through such an event. Production is therefore about increasing the amount of value that one could bring to society. It's a very important outlook. People are paid in proportion to their perceived value in a marketplace. In other words, is what I am doing difficult to do and no one else could do it? Or is it very easy to do? If it's very easy to do and it's something that most people would want to do, then the amount that you're going to get paid is probably going to be very small. What's the best way to increase one's perceived value? The answer is solving a problem and selling that situation through a business at scale. That is the entrepreneurial route. Now, most people, they just have jobs. They work 5 days a week, a certain amount of time, and it stops there. But if someone properly identifies ways that he could add value to the market, that will greatly increase his odds of increasing his wealth. You have many doctors, physicians, they worked for 30 or more years, and yet they can't retire. Why? The answer is they lived like doctors all of those years. They had no financial plan. Rabbi Dr. Meister explains that he's worked with many doctors with extremely fancy houses, expensive houses. Sometimes they just buy a new home every 3, 5 years just for the pleasure of constantly moving further and further up the scale. Very, very expensive houses. And the way that he puts it in the money nowadays with the inflation rate calculated, well over $2 million a house with high mortgages. Vacation homes. They wouldn't think twice about just blowing $10,000 or $20,000 in nowadays the money. Over $20,000 on a short vacation. Driving the most luxurious and expensive cars. Every 2 years getting a new one. He says that he knew one doctor whose cars were worth more than his entire house. And he said he worked with another doctor who bought an extremely expensive car and would complain that he wasn't happy with its size and other performances about it. So he asked him, why'd you buy the car? He said he liked the fact that people stared at him, at envy when he stopped at a red light. He says the same doctor told him that his daily expense and on principal and interest on his mortgages, car leases, etc., was $600 daily expense. That's before paying for food and other necessities. The guy wants people to stare at him. He could just paint his car pink. To buy a 30-year-old car, just paint it pink. Everyone will look at you. But anyways, doesn't leave so much left for investing, even on a doctor's salary. That goes with what we said before. It matters what you keep, not what you earn. These doctors didn't ever seriously invest because they thought that the money, the income would keep coming in and retirement would somehow take care of itself. And many times if they did invest, it was often in crazy and hard to understand limited partnerships or exotic sounding initial public offerings, or what they're called IPOs, of risky technology stocks or other fad investments. They were made on hot tips, these investments, so to say. without doing any fundamental research. They figured if they're smart enough to be doctors, therefore, they were smart enough to figure out really cool and complicated investments. At work, there were nurses, staff, and even patients that jumped after every command. So they said that their investments would also obey, quote, doctor's orders and go up, up, and up. It's the difference between the financial world and the medical world. And eventually they'll realize that they don't follow doctor's orders, finance. Many realize too late that just because he was smart enough to be a doctor doesn't mean that he knows anything about investing. On the contrary, when they say the expression, oh, this person's smart, most people, their smarts are limited to certain areas. Other areas they know nothing about. Doctors are usually very, very busy people and don't have time for investment reading. They work 10-hour days, sometimes 24, 48 hours. I know my wife, who's a PA, has done double shift before. It's 25 hours straight. You're exhausted after. And doctors, they have a much busier schedule. They stay up a night a few times a week. They're in stressful situations with sick and dying people. They have to stay on top of their game, making sure that they're mastering their latest professional and technical literature. Not a lot of time remaining for friends and for investment education. But it explains Rabbi Mais said the main culprit of keeping his colleagues from true long-term financial security is the lifestyle of spend, spend, and spend. They assume that wealth meant living wealthy. It doesn't. Wealth comes from saving and investing and living simply. This is true for the average person, by the way. 100%. And this is it, that wealth comes from discipline and consistency. Living below your means, taking extra money, investing it properly, and having a long-term view. The average millionaire is not Donald Trump, billionaire. The average middle-class person or physician who lives like President Trump is usually sitting on a pretty fragile house of cards with the foundation of leases and debt and interest payments. We're going to come back to the average millionaire at length. The trappings of wealth are there, but there are no long-term saving or security to back it up. The average millionaire lives in a simple house in a small town and doesn't drive a very fancy car. He's married to the same woman his whole life. He owns a simple business and works hard. In other words, the average millionaire does not live like a millionaire. Peter Lynch once stressed in his books and articles that you should be clearly able to express in less than a minute to even a financially uneducated listener why you bought stock or such and such a stock. The story should be concise, clear, and convincing. If you're in a high-tech stock which you don't understand at all, you have no idea of its financial fundamentals, and you bought it on a hot tip from a golfing buddy, then there's no way that you can and there's no way that you could explain it in a rational way in 2 sentences or less why you bought it. That's not good. But if you carefully research a stock and you understand its business, the overall industry it's in, and the financial fundamentals, then a brief, rational synopsis is easy. So the lesson for today is, lesson from all of this is a lot of information over here. You got to bring value to the table, society. And true wealth isn't about looking like you're wealthy, but it's about actually being wealthy. Remember one time, someone once came over and said, "Oh, you could do an addition here, you could do that." I said, "I can, but I don't want to." I could, but just because you could doesn't mean that you should. It's an important point to realize. Someone once said, "Oh, if you had the money, you would do it. You would do it." Not necessarily. I'm a person based on principles. You think I can't afford an ice cream at an ice cream truck by a playground for my kids? A couple dollars? It's the principle of the matter. It's about the discipline. And that's a major similarity between investing and learning Torah. And that's a problem nowadays. People don't have discipline. A lot of people would do themselves good if they would go to boot camp or an army camp for a little bit. Discipline, you could do a lot when you're disciplined. A lot. And that's what true investing and true wealth comes from. Discipline. It's boring. You gotta be patient. You gotta look at the long-term plan. Production versus consumption. Important topic to discuss over here. Okay, continue with the next one next time.